Now, former Race Discrimination Commissioner and human rights advocate Tim Soutphommasane says he has experienced a lot of hate during his life. Well, he's now written about it in a compelling new book. It is called On Hate, which looks at how we should respond to discrimination in our society. And Tim joins us now from Sydney. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
You start this little book with what I found to be a really confronting retelling of some of the correspondence you received shortly after taking up your gig at the Human Rights Commission. Just take us through some of the stuff you had to experience.
I'd always brace myself for the worst, Michael. Being Race Discrimination Commission and being an advocate on anti-racism means that you're going to be the target of some nasty correspondence. But I've received a death threat in the first few weeks of my job and received a lot of hate mail as well. That's something I'm used to and is something that I've dealt with, but it's a reminder of how much hate there is out there. And for those of us who are accustomed to this, you can very easily deal with it. But if you're talking about someone who's not used to being on the receiving end of hate, a young person or just an ordinary citizen engaged in public debate, it can have a deeply chilling effect. And when it comes to racial hatred, for example, there are countless examples of people who've really not spoken up because they've been targeted in some way by abuse or vilification.
What's driving this hate?
It can come from a number of sources, Michael. It can come from fear. It can come from anger. People may be unfamiliar with a certain group or may fear that a certain group is threatening a given way of life. Others may be angry at a sense that they're losing power or status or privilege in a society. So when you have fear and anger coming together, it often expresses itself in hate, a passionate dislike of someone else, something that isn't going to be governed by reason and something that can explode into violence if it does escalate.
And you use a description in this book as the mainstreaming of hate. Explain that, and do you feel people are feeling a lot more liberated to say stuff, to write stuff that in years past they wouldn't have?
Unfortunately, they have. And what we've seen is a licensing that's been given to hate mongers and other voices of extremism. And it's to do with the political debates that we have around race, identity and immigration. There are things 10, 15 years ago that would have been considered beyond the pale. These are things that are more easily aired these days. If you think of racism, this was just something that people accepted should be rejected, whereas now being open up for debate. Just look at our own national parliament, where you've had a senator on the floor of parliament in the form of Fraser Anning talking about a final solution to the immigration problem, or Pauline Hanson moving a motion about it being okay to be white, which is a slogan used by white supremacists, and that was a motion that was supported by some 20-odd government senators. So when we're talking about the mainstreaming of hate and normalisation of racism, what we're talking about is how some political leaders and segments of our political class are now openly entertaining it and giving latent, if not explicit, support to it.
You're right about the rise in nationalist populism around the world. We're certainly seeing that in Donald Trump's America, seeing it here in Australia as well, care of Pauline Hanson and other political players. But you're also right, Tim, that conditions for a transition from populism to fascism appear to be emerging. Is that a bit of a stretch, or do you seriously think that's what's facing us?
Well, we shouldn't be complacent about it, because history tells us that when fascism does emerge, it emerges through constitutional means. So it's not going to be a case that there's going to be a violent takeover of democracy. Fascism historically has come into being through democratic mechanisms. And this is a warning that's one issued by others around the world as well. I'm thinking of Madeleine Albright in the United States. What we've got to guard against is any complacency which says that it can't happen here or that history won't repeat. If we get too lazy about clamping down on hatred and extremism, it can become the new normal, and there may be generations of people in our society who may not understand the threat and may believe that liberal democracy is not necessarily the best available system of government. In fact, if you look at opinion polls and what the Lowy Institute has found in recent years, you find about half of young Australians 18 to 30 and 30 to 44 believing that democracy may not necessarily be the most preferable form of government. So it's a live threat, even though it may not appear pressing at the moment.
Really confronting and thought-provoking book. Tim Soutphommasane, thank you so much for joining us from Sydney.
Thanks, Michael.
Sounds like a great contribution to the national conversation, that one.
It is. It is a short book, as all the so-called on books are. You can read it in a short amount of time, but gee, some really telling points recounted there by Tim.